5 years ago, I was living in my 2009 Honda Civic in a Walmart parking lot in Tulsa, Oklahoma, showering at a 24-hour gym I could barely afford the membership for, and eating gas station food because it was cheap and didn't require a kitchen I didn't have. Today, I own the restaurant that fired me when I was at my absolute lowest point. This is the story of how that happened, and honestly, even after living through it, some days it still doesn't feel real. I need to go back to explain how I ended up living in my car in the first place, because it wasn't one big dramatic event, it was a slow collapse. The kind that happens so gradually you don't notice you've hit the bottom until you're already there. I grew up in a small town about an hour outside Tulsa. My parents divorced when I was 12, and I bounced between their houses for years, never really feeling settled anywhere. I was an okay student, not great, not terrible, and I drifted into community college mostly because it was what you were supposed to do without any real plan. I dropped out after a year and a half, not because of grades, but because my mom got sick, multiple sclerosis, and I moved back in with her to help take care of her while my dad, who lived 2 states away by then, sent money when he could but wasn't really present otherwise. For about 3 years, my life revolved around taking care of my mom and working part-time at a grocery store to cover bills. By the time I was 23, my mom's condition had stabilized enough that she could manage with home health aides, and I felt like I finally had a room to start building something for myself. I'd worked in restaurants on and off since I was 16. It was the only industry that consistently had openings that would hire someone with my patchy work history. And by 23, I'd worked my way up to a line cook position at a mid-range Italian restaurant called Bellucci's on the edge of downtown Tulsa. I actually loved working there for a while. The owner, a man named Frank Bellucci, who'd opened the place with his wife almost 20 years earlier, was demanding but fair, at least at first. I learned a lot. Real technique, not just fast food assembly line stuff. I started picking up extra shifts, cross-training on the line, even helping with some of the prep work for the catering side of the business. I genuinely thought for a couple of years I'd found something I could build a career around. Then Frank got sick himself, a stroke, when he was 61, and his son, Anthony, took over day-to-day operations. Anthony was not like his father. He was 28, had an MBA, and had spent maybe 6 months total actually working in a kitchen before deciding he understood the business better than people who'd been there for years. He cut staff, cut hours, started micromanaging in ways that made the kitchen feel less like a team and more like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. About 6 months after Anthony took over, my mom's condition took a sharp turn for the worse. A UTI had triggered a major MS flare, and she needed someone with her almost constantly for about 2 weeks while doctors adjusted her medications. I called in, explained the situation honestly, and asked if I could take an unpaid leave for 2 weeks or even just have my hours reduced temporarily. Anthony's response was that everyone has family stuff, and that if I couldn't commit to my scheduled shifts, I'd need to consider my position. I tried to make it work, picking up shifts when I could, having my mom's homemade cover extra hours that I honestly couldn't fully afford. But about 10 days into this, I missed a shift because my mom had a medical emergency, and I had to take her to the ER myself when her usual aide didn't show up. I called Anthony from the hospital waiting room, explained what had happened, and he fired me over the phone. Not even in person. Just, yeah, this isn't working out. Don't come in tomorrow. I was 24 years old, and I just lost the only steady income I had while sitting in an ER with my sick mother. Things spiraled from there faster than I ever imagined possible. I picked up gig work, delivery driving mostly, but it wasn't enough to cover rent on the apartment I'd been sharing with a roommate, especially once that roommate moved out and I couldn't cover the full lease alone. My mom's situation stabilized again, but the financial hole I'd fallen into during those weeks never closed. I fell behind in rent, got an eviction notice, and within about 4 months of being fired from Bellucci's, I was living in my car. I want to be honest about what that period was actually like, because I think people who haven't experienced it imagine it's more dramatic than it is. It's not constant crisis. It's mostly just exhausting, grinding monotony. Finding safe places to park overnight, figuring out where you can use a bathroom, doing delivery gig work for 10, 12 hours a day because every dollar mattered, then sitting in your car at 11 p.m. too tired to do anything but sleep, only to wake up and do it again. I was deeply ashamed, and I didn't tell my mom how bad things have gotten because she had enough to deal with, and I didn't want her worrying about me on top of everything else. This went on for almost 5 months. The turning point came from something almost embarrassingly small. I was doing a food delivery to an office building downtown, and while I was waiting in the lobby for someone to come down, I overheard two guys in suits talking about a ghost kitchen concept, basically a delivery-only kitchen space that companies could rent cheaply to test food concepts without the overhead of a full restaurant. One of them mentioned the company that was renting out kitchen space by the hour in an industrial part of town. Cheap, no long-term commitment. I don't fully know what made me write down the name of that company on my delivery receipt. I think I was just desperate for any idea that felt like it could be a way out, even a tiny one. I looked into it. The rates were genuinely low, about $15 an hour for kitchen access, which I could afford a few hours of per week if I was careful. I started small. I made a batch of my mom's old recipe for chicken and dumplings, something I'd grown up eating, something that felt like home, and sold containers of it through a local Facebook food group, picking up orders for cash, no delivery, just local pickup from the kitchen space itself. The first week, I sold maybe 8 containers, made about $40 profit after ingredients and kitchen rental. It wasn't much, but it was money I'd made from something I'd built myself. And something about that felt different from gig delivery work in a way that I can't fully explain. I kept at it, added a couple more menu items, a smoked brisket chili, a cornbread that became surprisingly popular. Within about 4 months, I was making enough from weekend sales that I could afford a cheap room in a shared house, finally getting out of the car. Within 8 months, I was doing this almost full time, supplementing with gig work on slow weeks. About a year and a half after I was fired from Bellucci's, I heard through an old coworker that the restaurant was struggling badly. Anthony's management style had driven away most of the experienced staff over the years. Online reviews had cratered, and Frank, the original owner, now mostly recovered from the stroke, but in his late 60s and ready to retire fully, wanted to sell the building and business outright rather than watch his son run it further into the ground. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel something complicated when I heard that. Part of me felt a flash of something almost like satisfaction, but mostly I just saw an opportunity, a building I knew intimately, in a location I knew was good, with a kitchen layout I could have navigated blindfolded, available at a price that, with my savings plus a small business loan, was actually within reach. I reached out to Frank directly, not Anthony, and we met for coffee. I told him honestly about my history at the restaurant, about being fired, about everything that had happened since. Frank, to his credit, was mortified to hear how things had gone down. He genuinely didn't know the details of my firing, since he'd been recovering from his stroke at the time, and Anthony had handled all staffing decisions. We worked out a deal. I bought the building and the business, what remained of it, about 5 months later. The day I got the keys, I walked through that kitchen alone, before any contractors or staff arrived. Same tile floors I used to mop at 1 a.m., same walk-in cooler with the door that always stuck a little. I stood in the spot where I used to clock in, and I just stood there for a long time. We reopened about 2 months later, after renovations, under a new name, a tribute to my mom actually, using a version of her maiden name. We kept some of Bellucci's old recipes that Frank shared with me, but built a menu that blended that Italian foundation with the Southern comfort food that had gotten me through the hardest year of my life. As for Anthony, he wasn't part of the sale, obviously, and as far as I know, he's working in some unrelated corporate role now. I don't feel triumphant about that, honestly. Mostly, I just feel like the whole situation taught me something about how quickly things can fall apart and how unpredictable the path back up can be. My mom got to see the restaurant before she passed away last year. She came to the opening, sat at a table near the kitchen, and cried when she tasted the chicken and dumplings on the menu, made almost exactly the way she used to make it. I think about that car in the Walmart parking lot more often than people would probably expect, given where things ended up. I don't think the lesson here is some neat, never give up message. There were nights in that car where giving up felt like the only reasonable option, and I think anyone who's been there would understand that. But I do think there's something to be said for how often the thing that saves you ends up being something small and almost accidental. An overheard conversation, an old family recipe, a Facebook post nobody important saw. I just happened to be in the right parking lot at the right time, I guess.